Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. In politics, the opposition parties often consider it their sacred duty to create mountains out of molehills, and if the molehills are not there, then to create some dust, possibly their own dirt, and then show it to be shitted. And that is much more in particularly every country. But when I look at my countries, I'm ashamed because decency, decorum, honesty is supposed to be the hallmark of these people. Recently, much ado about nothing is the case of election commissioner being called for a meeting. And it is said that it fringes the integrity of the election commission. It's bullshit. Those who head state organs and institutions always abide by conventions and traditions and zealously guard them. And beyond the immediate controversy generated by the Ministry of Law Justice letter to Election Commissioner or a meeting convened by PM on common electoral polls lies the train of India's institutional structure, its conventions and traditions. It was said that the letter was sent by PMO, and then it came to be known that it was not sent by PMO. It was sent by the Ministry of Law and Justice. And since the law was to be reframed, restructured, it was important to get an input from the Election Commission so that tomorrow they cannot say that the Election Commission was bypassed. But this was a catch-22 situation. If the Election Commission is not consulted, then the government says the government has bypassed the Election Commission and infringes it. If they're calling for a meeting, then it's being insulted. As a matter of fact, the latter is a product of the changing landscape, and it would be appropriate to derive certain logical conclusions from the ministry's press communique and the portion of the letter that appeared in the media and has not been denied. And why should it be denied? Because this is a fact of life. Now, I personally know that the prime ministers have always consulted the ECs and even the judges many times before taking an action to see the legal requirement. As far as this communique is concerned, it clarifies that PMO not only addresses communication, convening the meeting to the Cabinet Secretary, Law Secretary, Legislative Department. It was Secretary Legislative Department who thought it appropriate to invite officials of the Election Commission for this meeting. Now, word used is officials. Nowhere does it say that the Chief Election Commissioner has to come himself or all the three election commissioners have to come. It could be secretary, it could be an undersecretary, it could be a director, it could be the legal advisor. As a matter of fact, anybody representing the view of the election commission could come and participate. The PMO did not seek at the initial stage to involve the EC in the meeting. And it was completely in order for Secretary Legal Department, SLD, to suggest involving the EC in the meeting, and that has been a common practice. As I said, even the most strict election commissioner, chief election commissioner, T.N. Session, was invited at least 4 times, to my knowledge, personal knowledge, by Rajiv Gandhi for a personal discussion. And nobody raised an eyebrow. Why? Because that was Congress and now this is Bharatiya Janata Party. Mrs. Gandhi used to invite the election commission practically once in every 3-4 months, especially when the elections were due or they were over to discuss various things. And a couple of times the Prime Minister also intervened to suggest the poll symbols, but it was a suggestion, not a directive. So, in keeping with the standard practice, the legislative department approached the PM for participation and they cleared it with the PMO office. So, it's inconceivable that there was any violation of the tradition. Constitution is one thing. Traditions and conventions make that dead document come alive. There is no British Constitution. Zero. And all the Constitution is the conventions that have been established, the traditions that are there, and it's all unwritten. But they are strictly adhered to. When you write a constitution, there are many things you do not foresee. So sensible people lay down or take action, which becomes a tradition, becomes a convention. The first Chief Election Commissioner was very honest Kumar, S. Kumar, and Pandit Nehru used to honor him. And once Pandit Nehru himself drove down to a Chief Election Commissioner to have a discussion. And he said, "Sir, why have you come? You should have called me." For the simple reason that the Prime Minister in protocol is next to the President. And that dignity must be maintained. And then Kumar very clearly said, "Sir, your calling me or me coming to you does not involve that we are going to do something dishonest. And if we want to be dishonest, then we don't have to meet, we can do it otherwise as well." Now, text of the Legislative Department's letter, keeping that tradition in mind, which was of the 50s. This letter has not been released and it should not be released. But then they have released the experts and the communique states very clearly that the final operative paragraph of the EC letter reads now, "Requested Secretary, Election Commission of India to attend the meeting." The Secretary, not the Election Commissioner. And what's the purpose of the Secretary except to liaise with the government? Then, they said, the Principal Secretary to the PM will chair a meeting and expect CEC to be present during the conference. These words are operational as can be, yes, but they do not admit any explanation. It's quite tenable to suggest the CEC never goes anywhere, is not expected to attend the meeting. The media, in its stupidity, failed to notice the distinction between CEC and the institution he had, the EC. The man is not the institution. The institution is not the man. It was the institution which was invited, not the man. So, as a matter of fact, the objection has not been from CEC. The beauty is that all this noise is not being created by the CEC, but by media and by the former, some bureaucrats, especially Mr. Qureshi, who was an earlier CEC, and he was the most trenchant, voluble critic. As a matter of fact, the only thing that was lacking was that some PM officials or some sector states expect the heads of independent constitutional bodies to participate in a meeting convened by the Principal Secretary. As a matter of fact, there is nothing wrong. If they can meet every evening at Gymkhana and have a drink together, if they can go to the socials, then what's the problem with having a meeting where the views are taken, decision is not taken, decision will be taken by the cabinet. The national good requires that the three organs of the state, there's the legislature, judiciary, and the executive, and the independent constitutional bodies function harmoniously, like the Chief Election Commissioner's office, and they do it according to the constitutional and legal mandates. It has to be very clear that their interstate relations are marked by a desire to maintain each other's dignity. Clearly, the need to consult each other has to be there. It has to be kept in mind. You remember, I was reading a legendary advocate of Allahabad High Court, Kanhaiya Lal Misra, very capable. He was well known for his wisdom and learning. And I must say I learned a lot from him what a connection. And he wrote about the muscles and the sinews, the coursing blood in the country's body that give any institution like the High Court strength, its resilience and its glory. Now what he said about the High Court is relevant to the Election Commission. That is, the traditions and the conventions are the muscles and the sinews. And the traditional convention has been that whenever a decision is to be taken, the Election Commission is invited to give its input. Now, what happens? Election Commission is deeply involved in conducting the election. It knows the problem it faces. It knows the issues that can arise. It knows the post-election conflicts. So if precautions can be taken and the consultation can be held, what's wrong with that? You remember the farmers' protest, the whole protest was that there was no consultation, though the laws were perfectly good and useful. So here the government is taking action, positive action, and having consultation with the main authority who is to conduct the elections, supervise them, initiate them, and who is from alpha to omega responsible for this. The people who head the state organs and institutions have to abide by the conventions and traditions and silently guard them. Now, what happens is that the traditions and conventions are not set in stone. They evolve over the passage of time. More so when most of our traditions are derived from the colonial times. Do you think that if we had been a British colony even today and the Viceroy was there, anybody would dare talk like that? And this has happened in India since 1960. Traditions and conventions cannot be allowed to come in the way of national progress. The only yardstick is to judge the changes in the conventions and the traditions in the functioning of the institutions and the interaction. Should be this. This is a million-dollar question that has to be kept in mind. Have they strengthened the foundations of the Indian democracy or not? Now, one thing we should not forget, the practicality. The historical experience for the last 300 years of democracy shows that all political power is inherently extensive. They want to expand. But this is not only the executive or the political power, it is even the judiciary. So this has been witnessed in India too, where the Indian executive, which is elected, and then it has been of different ideologies. Janta, khichdi, mixed stew, Congress, then Congress aided by the leftists, again UPA, combination of diverse groups, and then BJP. So these institutions are a part of the executive. Let's not forget it. Chief Election Commissioner is a part of the executive. It's not a judiciary. Organs are three. And then they are independent institutions within those. So consultations between the independent institutions have to occur, but it would be graceful for the political bureaucratic system to show respect. If the word had been there, you are directed to come, I would have objected. It was you are requested to come. And it was not you requested to some official. So, we have seen the judicial organ has flexed its muscle through interpretations, which have creatively empowered them in a manner that there has been departure from the tradition. Earlier, there was no judicial commission. It was a weakness of Manmohan Singh, who was practically useless as far as this was concerned, that the tradition established by Nehru, Shastri, Indira, Charan Singh, Morarji Desai even, and then again Indira and Rajiv was given a goodbye. And the judges started appointing themselves. So consultations between the independent institutions and the executive must happen. But it's appropriate for the political and the bureaucratic executive to show respect. And that is what has been done, as I said here. There has been no error. And those who had the judicial organ for the state have themselves broken conventions. They have been within law, but they have broken the convention, and that was all. You remember, the first to do so was the Chief Justice of India one time. He resigned his office to stand as opposition candidate for the presidency in 1967. Why did he do it? He was the Chief Secretary. In 1967, he was a combined candidate of the united opposition, which in fact has never been united, and opposed the candidature of the officially sponsored candidate by the Congress party. Now, the time has come in India that those who had the organs of state and the institutions and the public at large and the media to scrutinize the entire corpus of Indian state conventions to strengthen the democratic polity. Now, what media is doing is it's standing for, professes to stand for that, but it keeps its slant clearly anti-government, which is not proper. It should be objective. I agree, it's not easy to be objective, it's very difficult. And being objective is one of the most difficult things in life. So if it cannot be objective, then what's to be done? And the only thing to be done is go strictly by the convention and the traditions and the law. Secondly, the public has to be educated so that it can see through the game of the politicians and not be unnecessarily inflamed one way or the other. Let's not forget, India is passing through a different phase. People don't talk of that. It's passing through basically a period of ideological contest, the contest between right and left, the contest between conservatives and neoliberals, the contest between absolutely secular with special love for the minorities and absolutely secular with absolute love for the majority, making majoritarianism the main creed. This is a time when the politics of the country is no holds barred politics. Everything is fair. This is a period when the ethical values are zero, nil. So, it's all the more important for the intelligentsia, for the legal department, for the sensitive, capable media, not the biased media, not the purchased media, to present facts and comments in a manner to clarify situations rather than inflame passions. That's the way the salvation of the country lies. But the present scenario is very clear. This call for a meeting was perfectly valid, legal, justified, and in no way an infringement either of the capability or the respect or the integrity of the Election Commission, and it is in fact a continuation of the policy that has been adopted heretofore. Thank you.